and I think many people in the West don't know, the ruling class in Turkey, over 90%, they are pro-NATO and Atlanticists. I thought it was like 50-50. No, it's the absolute majority. And the economic interests around Erdogan, which is, it's very funny. They are called in Turkey the Gang of Five. You know why Gang of Five? 5 major real estate developers in Turkey, which are closely linked to the AKP and with Erdogan. And they want commercial opportunities everywhere. Not only Turkey, but in the, let's say, Organization of Turkic States spectrum, which goes all the way to Xinjiang in China. So this is what they want. So they want, which is what they have, free reign commercially inside Turkey, business opportunities in the Turkic space, which means Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, essentially these ones, and Turkmenistan as well.
Hello, everyone. This is the New Rules Podcast, and I'm your host, Dimitri Symes Jr. Today, we have a special episode for you on Turkey. Now, Turkey is a country that occasionally makes international headlines, but for the most part flies under the radar. And in my view, this is a huge mistake on the part of journalists and analysts, because as the recent events in Syria made clear, Turkey is capable, it is powerful enough to make major changes on the geopolitical stage. And if we want to understand the 21st century geopolitical picture going forward, we need to understand Turkey, what it wants, and what it's capable of. And to help us do that, we're very pleased to welcome a longtime friend of the program, Pepe Escobar, who just got back from Istanbul. Pepe, thank you for joining the program.
Enormous pleasure to be with you, Dimitri, and with our audience, of course.
So, Pepe, let me start with a general philosophical question, right? Erdogan has been in power for 20 years, so he's had an opportunity to shape Turkish foreign policy in his vision. What is his ultimate foreign policy goal? How does he view Turkey's role in the world?
That's a wonderful question that would require us a few hours to answer properly. I'll try to give you the concise version. He is a neo-Ottomanist. He would like to have even a partial revival of the Ottoman Empire. That's where Aleppo comes in. It's very, very important because then we can understand what happened in Syria better. Whenever I lived in Istanbul 3 years ago, first part of the year, during the SMO, the beginning of the SMO, and when they struck that famous deal, I was there. And the Turks, the hosts, they were beaming because they saw it, at least in the first few hours. We did it. We ended a war thanks to our efforts. And they were right, because they put it, the full force of the foreign ministry was concentrated on that. And as we know, the whole thing collapsed in a matter of hours, right? So this was part of a Turkish foreign policy for the global south and for the global north as well. But with Erdogan, it's very complicated because Erdogan is intimately linked to the role of the AKP party, which is soft Islamist party, but it's still an Islamist party as well. So when you are in Istanbul and you talk to independent analysts or lawyers, secular, very, very important, not Islamists, Kemalists, this means they are secular, they are pro-Turkish Republic, not a revival of Ottomanism.
Secular nationalists.
Secular nationalists. And one of them, we had an amazing geopolitical dinner last week, in fact. And I asked the usual questions, but center on Syria and BRICS. But as an introduction, one of them explained to me the divisions inside Turkey, which are more and more acute. You have more or less 3 big factions: nationalists, pro-Western, and Islamists. But these are subdivided as well. Nationalists, Turkish nationalists, secular, they told me, we have right-wing Kemalists and left-wing Kemalists as well. Some are socialists and some are capitalists. Pro-Western, Atlanticists, this means they are pro-NATO. They are pro-European Union and pro-NATO. And the Islamists is even more complicated because you have nationalist Islamists and you have hardcore pro-Western Islamists.
Pro-Western Islamists.
Pro-Western Islamists. And that's where the relationship between the ruling classes of Turkey with the West, especially with Europe, comes in. And Erdogan and the AKP, they are trying to seduce this part of the world specifically.
The pro-Western Islamists.
Exactly.
How does that even work, right? Because
very good question.
You say, I want to build, an Islamic society based on Sharia. And so our main allies in this endeavor are going to be the European and American countries that can't tell you what a woman is.
Exactly. So you can imagine the internal contradictions of this intra-Islamist clash, right? A good example. They don't want Sharia law per se. They would like to have what Erdogan and the AKP have been doing for the past few years, which one of these analysts described to me as Arabization. So this means that this Islamist pro-Western camp, but looking at the West, they are essentially pro-Arab as well. And they are Arabizing Turkish society. Why? There is an economic interest to that because it's influx of Arab capital in the Turkish economy, especially Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And this, I'll give you a very simple example. If you walk the streets of Istanbul, certain bazaars, certain parts of town, and you talk to local people about all those Arabs around, they don't like it. They say they're coming here, they have better opportunities than us, they flaunt their money, they buy everything in sight, they don't contribute to our local economy, so there is a popular resentment as well. So you see how it's all complicated. But this is encouraged by the AKP, by Erdogan himself.
So you kind of provided our audience members with this complex mosaic of Turkey's political, spectrum. How does this influence Erdogan's foreign policy decision-making? Because, when you obviously have so many different factions that you rely on, that means you have to constantly try and appease them, not only in domestic politics, but also in foreign policy.
Absolutely. Excellent question, Dimitri. And this is something that you won't see if you read the mainstream Turkish press, which is all, I would say more than 90%, Erdogan AKP aligned. This you get from independent observers, secular, exactly, Kemalists. Let's say the French would say républicains, republicanists, the Turkish way, right? And for instance, this is something that I learned 3 years ago that I didn't know, and I think many people in the West don't know. The ruling class in Turkey, over 90%, they are pro-NATO and Atlanticists. I thought it was like 50-50. No, it's the absolute majority. And the economic interests around Erdogan, which is, it's very funny. They are called in Turkey the Gang of Five. You know why Gang of Five? 5 major real estate developers in Turkey, which are closely linked to the AKP and with Erdogan. And they want commercial opportunities everywhere. Not only Turkey, but in the, let's say, Organization of Turkic States spectrum, which goes all the way to Xinjiang in China. If they could get investments in Xinjiang in China. The Chinese say, no, not here. You can do it in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, but not here. This is Chinese territory. So this is what they want. So they want, which is what they have, free reign commercially inside Turkey, business opportunities in the Turkic space, which means Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, essentially these ones. And Turkmenistan as well. And at the same time, good relations with Europe, because 40% of foreign trade of Turkey is with the EU. So the EU is an enormous customer of Turkish products, and also they also import Gastarbeiter, let's put it this way. Not only those that live in Germany, but in other parts of the EU as well. So it's a very complicated balance. But I think what strikes us outside of Turkey more is this Arabization phenomenon, which is something that the AKP wants, Erdogan wants, but the majority of the Turkish population does not agree with that, by all means. For instance, many were against Turkish involvement in Syria because of the influx of Syrian immigrants in Turkey, more than 4 million. They told me last week that some of them are coming back to Turkey, but not many, because they still don't know who actually is going to run Syria. And Syria now is a black void. We have a former Al-Qaeda who elected himself as president earlier this week. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. And I'm sure Ankara doesn't know. According to some of my friends who are in Ankara as professors, they say, no, nobody in the government knows what's going to happen next. And this was not what they were expecting.
So I definitely want to return to Syria. But
of course.
A point that really struck with me was when you said 90% of the Turkish political business elite are Atlanticists.
Yes.
And that on the one hand, they want to do business in Europe. On the other hand, they want to break into new markets in Central Asia.
Yes.
It would seem then that if these people were the ones pulling the strings, Turkey would be vehemently anti-Russia across the board. They would be just as anti-Russia as, let's say, Germany, as France, as all the other US vassal states. But what we see is that Turkey is playing this sort of complex game with Russia, where on the one hand, they support Ukraine, they undermine Russia and Syria, obviously. Mm-hmm. But trade between Russia and Turkey is also skyrocketing. And Erdogan declared last autumn that he wants to join BRICS. And one of the countries spearheading that is Russia. So what's going on? Why is it that despite having such a heavily pro-Western elite, Erdogan is trying to maintain his bridges with Russia?
Excellent question, because it goes to the heart of Erdogan hedging his bets all the time. I asked this question to my interlocutors in Istanbul, and some of them were blunt, totally blunt. They said Turkey will never enter BRICS, even as partners. They will be hedging their bets all the time. Not to mention as a full member of BRICS, like Indonesia was accepted only a few weeks ago. He uses that vis-a-vis the West. He said, oh, okay, you don't want me. You don't want closer collaboration? No problem. I have BRICS. I have Eurasia. But Ankara as a whole, Erdogan and the system that he runs in Ankara, they have not made a bet to be part of the Eurasia integration process, which means an even closer relationship with, especially the Primakov Triangle, Russia, India, and China. And their relationship with Russia and China is uneasy. From the point of view of China, they would love of course, they love buying cheap Chinese products, high-quality Chinese products, but they are also a manufacturer of very good Turkish products, textile industry, manufactured products in general. And with Russia, they need energy, badly. And, of course, investment in nuclear power plants, etc. So they simply cannot antagonize Russia, but it's an uneasy relationship. And this was clear during the Astana process in Syria. We always have to come back to Syria because how they interacted vis-a-vis Syria explains a lot. Iran and Russia were trying to bring the Turkish position on Syria closer to their position, Russia, Iran. So it was very, very complicated to have these three on the table discussing the future of Syria. At the time, they were inside because basically they were deciding the political future of Syria. Now, the whole thing turned upside down in a matter of less than 2 months. There are outsiders looking in, Iran and Russia. And Turkey is theoretically inside Syria, but it's not what they wanted. One of my interlocutors said explicitly, the original plan was Aleppo, was never go all the way to Damascus. So when Turkish MIT, Intel, and Erdogan saw that they were going all the way to Damascus, immediately afterwards they said, okay, now what do we do? Because they don't have all the military power that they need to control the western part of Syria, the Syria that works, right? And they don't know what to do with it because they never planned for it. And they don't have the funds. The Saudis have the funds, the Emiratis have the funds, but not Turkey. So they are now in a bind completely in what is going to be our role in Syria. And on top of it, they cannot trust the current self-appointed former Al-Qaeda turned president. He was an asset, an important asset of MIT, Turkish Intel, but up to the conquest of Aleppo. And now he thinks he's an independent player.
So, I mean, I think now is the perfect time to talk about Syria,
Okay.
right? Because most people interpret it as Erdogan scoring a big victory last December when Jolani and his Turkish-backed gang of jihadists swept across Syria in the span of, what was it, 1 week, 2 weeks?
10 days.
10 days.
Roughly, yeah.
Overthrew the Assad government and, put an end to the Syrian civil war after 14 years. And sort of the expectation was that Erdogan was one of the men of the hour. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying is that the situation for Turkey is far more complex. Mm-hmm. So where does Turkey go from here? Because they now have their people in charge in Damascus. What do they do now?
Theoretically, Dimitri, they have Jolani in charge in Damascus. But once again, and this is what my interlocutors told me, they cannot trust Jolani. Like the relationship was, let's say, transactional to the point of MIT using Jolani to start a sort of greater Idlibistan revolt against Aleppo, which is close to Idlib, 150 kilometers maximum. Never to take over power in Damascus. And this is, for me, was a revelation. I learned a lot from this conversation. Because they sketch what you won't see in Turkish media, and much less what those think tanks in Washington think about what happened in Syria. They also don't know. What they do know is that the Americans were prepared for it. It's what the Americans wanted from the beginning, right? Get rid of Assad. And they got it after 13 years. They were extremely perseverant. And in the case of Erdogan, it was different. The Turks were waiting, and in the end, they got into the American bandwagon. But now they're going to have to share power with people that they don't know. And obviously, Jolani is not a fool. He was educated at an American gulag in Camp Bucca in Iraq, close to the Kuwaiti border, where all the big brains of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and later ISIS, this is why these people were incarcerated. And they were talking among each other all the time. And they are not fools, far from it.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of reminds me of the conversation I had with Jackson Hinkle and Haz Al-Din for our end of the year special. In a certain sense, I see interesting parallels between what happened with Jolani in Syria and what happened with Lenin and Tsarist Russia. Well, not Tsarist Russia, but, provisional government
Provisional government.
And at the time, Lenin got a major boost from the Germans because he was living in Switzerland and he had no real way of getting safely back to Russia. And so
That's getting me on the train.
Yeah. And so there were people in the German political and military elite who was like, let's help this guy out.
Absolutely.
Kaiser Wilhelm II was initially apprehensive because he's like, wait, this guy is, nuts. He's against the monarchical system that we represent. are you sure we want to help this guy? But they're like, no, trust me. This will help destabilize Russia and strengthen our geopolitical position in Eastern and Central Europe. And initially, it looks like the bet pays off, right? Because the Russian military collapses. Lenin concludes the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which is highly, highly favorable to the Germans in terms of a territorial settlement. But you fast forward less than 20 years, 1945, and the Soviet troops are marching in Berlin, and half of Germany finds itself under Soviet occupation until 1991. And so the point I guess it's important to make is that people have agency, right? And that people who you may think are your puppets today, 20 years later, may come to haunt you.
Absolutely. No question, Dimitri. You put it very, very well. And this is something that might happen with Giuliani. And the Turks are starting to be extremely apprehensive about it. Very important visit to Damascus this past few days. The Emir of Qatar in person. This is huge. He usually doesn't travel. He very rarely travels. And we know who weaponized HTS and other groups in Idlib for years, with a lot of money buying weapons. Qatar. So Qatar wants a piece of the Syrian pie. Nobody knows exactly what it is. And the Turks also don't know what Qatar wants. It's not only that famous mythical pipeline, which is a story that many of us have been following for years. One of the reasons of the war in Syria.
Yeah, but Qatar or Turkey pipeline, which crosses through Syria and would potentially provide an alternative to the traditional Russian gas pipelines to Europe.
Absolutely correct. And this was one of the reasons that Qatar turned against Assad, even personally, right? It's fascinating because when you look at the time, there are photos that you still can find, I think, of Assad and Asma having dinner with the Emir of Qatar and his wife, like best friends, just before the start of the war, you know. So it's another instance of how the Arab world is really a nest of spies. They turn on each other over and over and over and over again. And this is something that will certainly happen in Syria. We still don't know who is going to turn against who. Because first of all, Giuliani has to, which is something that he's already tried to do, incorporate all the other jihadist groups into the government. Apparently, this is what happened these past few days. We still don't know if everybody's going to swear by the Syrian flag in the new Syrian army. We still don't know, right? Then, the competing interests of Turkey, Israel, Qatar, and of course, the Americans. The Americans are not going anywhere in Syria. We all know that. But what do the Americans want apart from what they already have? Which is the collaboration with the Kurds and helping to get that oil to Erbil, later sold to Israel for a super price because it's stolen oil, essentially. Nobody has asked Donald Trump what he wants to do with the American troops in Syria. He says that he's bringing them back. But for the moment, this is just talk, right? So all that adds to the insecurity in Ankara about, okay, what do we do next? They don't know. According to my interlocutors, very well connected, they say, nobody knows what to do next.
You raise a really, I think, interesting and important problem because as you pointed out, the Turkish business elite doesn't want a showdown with the West.
Exactly.
They want to do business with the West. But now that they've won in Syria, they basically find themselves in a very tense and unstable situation in regards to the Americans and to the Israelis. Because the Israelis have bitten off a good part of the southern chunk of Syria, and the Americans obviously are, sitting in the east with all the oil fields, and they're basically providing a military umbrella for the Kurds, who the Turks cannot accept because, for our viewers who are not familiar with this, the Turkish government regards any sort of Kurdish state as an existential threat.
Absolutely.
Because Turkey has a large Kurdish minority, which has been prone to separatist moods in the past. And so if there's a quote-unquote Kurdish state either in Syria or in neighboring Iraq, that's a big problem for Turkey. But now, Syria is basically partitioned, and the Kurds arguably could emerge stronger. So how does Turkey navigate between the United States and Israel and Syria?
Exactly. If there is one thing that Ankara is absolutely sure of, is that the Kurds cannot emerge stronger from the partition of Syria. And that's why we heard already a few weeks ago, 10 days, 2 weeks or so, already a threat of a Turkish military intervention against SDF in northeast Syria. Can you imagine, Dimitri? This would be a NATO against NATO war, de facto. You cannot escape it. It will be NATO against NATO. And obviously, the Americans look at it and said, we don't want this, obviously. And this will imply a super back channel between Washington and Ankara. Okay, a few concessions for you vis-a-vis the Kurds, but we stay there. But maybe we can say that we are not supporting SDF anymore, but we will. But no military invasion. Let's try to solve this. They will keep confined to a few areas, which is already the case because the Kurds are confined to a few areas, and they are clashing with local Arab tribes. So there is already an internal northeast Syria mini war between Kurds and Arab tribes. And the Americans don't want to get into this, the last thing that they want at the time. And the Kurds love the idea because it's divide and rule, played the Turkish way, right?
Yeah. So we've talked quite a bit about Syria, but I think that it's important to acknowledge that the Turks are not just in Syria. They've also been playing a heavy military and political role in Libya for numerous years. And this periodically appeared in international news, but almost everyone has forgotten it. For many of our viewers, this is the first time they're hearing that the Turks are in Libya. So can you tell us, what are the Turks doing in Libya, and why are the Greeks and French freaking out over it?
Well, I prefer to be totally frank with you, Dimitri. I'm not following the Turks in Libya. You know why? Because I chose to follow the Turks in Central Asia.
All right, so let's talk about Central Asia then.
No, but your question is excellent. And if you ask this question in Istanbul, a lot of people Turks won't be able to answer your question. They have no clue what Turkey is doing in Libya. Literally.
I mean, though, they are backing the government in Tripoli.
Is that against what the Russians are backing, which is the Haftar government in the east?
But not just the Russians, it's also the Emiratis.
The Emiratis, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other thing that really does catch my eye is their energy moves, right? Because they basically signed a massive oil and gas exploration deal with the Libyans. And Libya has a lot of untapped resources and resources that were basically neglected after the fall of Gaddafi. So now if the Turks are able to go in and they're able to get a share of this Libyan energy pie, that is huge revenues for Turkey.
Exactly.
It means huge cheap oil, which by comparison to the European neighbors who are having high energy costs, this will allow Turkey to be considerably more competitive when it comes to manufacturing, industry, just overall standard of living.
So you answered your question, because then they will also become energy exporters. If they get what they want from Libya, they automatically become energy exporters as well. So it's a very clever game on the energy front, because it's not about Turk Stream. It's not about the BTC pipeline.
Yeah, just break those pipelines down for our viewers. Because again, as I mentioned,
we need maps.
Yeah, we will. add maps to the B-roll after we release that. So, let's break down the pipelines.
The most important, it's the pipeline that was negotiated personally by Zbig Brzezinski with Aliyev father in 1995 in Baku, the BTC pipeline. Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan. It's Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey. The oil comes from Baku. All the oil comes from Baku. Then pipeline arrives in Turkey, and then it goes to Europe, to Israel. Right. Anybody buying, right? There is a gas pipeline parallel to the BTC as well. Turk Stream is the pipeline from Russia to Turkey, essential for providing energy to Turkey. So these are the main ones. So this means that Turkey receives gas from abroad, but obviously they have very few reserves. That's where Libya comes in. If they get what they want, if they're probably going to get an excellent commercial deal, because that Libyan government, they're not doing business with practically anybody. The Turks arrive en masse and say, okay, this is the deal, you have your cut, and then we have our major cut, and then we can also export. So they turn automatically their role into energy providers.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that they're not just in Libya doing this. The Turks are in Somalia, of all places, signing a deal to develop Somalia's oil and gas reserves. And again, Somalia doesn't have the same, oil and gas wealth that Libya has.
Yes.
But what it does have is largely untapped because
it's untapped. Right.
Because the Somalians don't have the money to do so. But the Turks are coming in and they're swooping it up.
But there's an extra problem, Dimitri. The Turks also don't have the money to do it. So who is going to finance that? Arabization. The capital has to come from the Persian Gulf. That's right. Especially these relationships, especially with the Emirates, are very, very close at the highest level. I mean MBZ, Erdogan, even personally.
Wait, so just so our viewers understand.
Okay.
So Turkey and the Emirates are clashing for influence in Libya, but the Turks are going over to the Emirates and saying, hey, can you help finance our power projects in Somalia?
Can you give us a little bit of cash, please? We want to become energy producers just like you. Well, that tells you how it works in the Arab world. It works like that.
So you said that you follow the Turks in Central Asia. So let's dive deep into that. First of all, tell our viewers, why is Central Asia important? Because this is a part of the world that almost never comes up in the mainstream media. And what do the Turks want to do in Central Asia?
Well, Organization of Turkic States. The headquarters is in Istanbul. I stopped by last week. There was nobody to talk to. It was closed. It's a very interesting organization. When I went there the first time 2 years ago, and I talked to them face to face, they didn't know how to explain what they do exactly.
They didn't?
No, they didn't. So it was a Kafkaesque conversation. Fascinating. They were trying to imply what they do by not saying much. But then when you go to Central Asia, you see what they're doing. It's basically a gang of 5 project. It's to get building contracts in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, in Kyrgyzstan especially. And I saw this personally when I went to southern Kazakhstan. So one day I arrived in Turkestan, which has a fabulous Silk Road history, southern Kazakhstan, and I stay in a caravanserai, but a modern caravanserai, like a shopping mall. You say, wow, in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. I said, who built this thing? Guess, a Turkish construction company. I go to the main mosque in town. There is a cultural center attached to it. Who's financing it? Turkey. I go to the main library in town, fascinating library, etc. Who built it? Turkey. So aha, then you get your answer. They are investing heavily in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. Not cultural, a few cultural projects, but mostly building contracts for Turkish construction companies. And this is under the umbrella of expanding Turkish values and Turkic culture to the organization of Turkic states. And the main ones are Azerbaijan, the three Central Asians as well. And then one day I was in Astana for a forum, and if you go to the Astana Museum, which is, by the way, an amazing museum, history of nomads in Central Asia, there's this huge map in one of the rooms. It's the map of Turkic nations. And when you start looking at all the Turkic or Turkic-related tribes that they identified on the map, it's like almost 40 different ethnic groups, and including the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, of course, because they are a Turkic group as well. So Turkey wants to expand their cultural influence along this axis, which is a Silk Road axis as well across Central Asia. Because as the Silk Road is one of my personal obsessions in terms of research and a book that I want to write in the future, etc. That's why I'm always following Central Asia more closely than West Asia or Northern Africa, for instance.
Yeah.
And when I returned to this room at the Astana Museum, I said, wow, so this Turkey wants to be present in all this enormous access, all the way to Xinjiang, and the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, which the Turks still call Turkestan, which is the original denomination, right?
But is there I understand the cultural factor, because obviously there's a common heritage, common lineage even. But can you elaborate on the economic aspect? Because again, most of the world, if you read the Western media, they think of Central Asia as the sort of backwards, economically poor region of the world. Why are the Turks so invested on expanding their cultural, economic, and political presence in this particular region?
Cultural attached to economic, but in terms of commercial interests, business deals, and business expanding Turkish business along the steppes, let's put it that way. Yeah. The problem is they are competing with two superpowers who more or less monopolize business all across Central Asia. Russia, because the lingua franca in Central Asia is Russian.
Yeah.
All the business classes, they talk among themselves in Russian. They don't even use their local languages. And China, because China is making inroads in Central Asia as part of Belt and Road, of course. So when you get, for instance, to Tashkent, capital of Uzbekistan, you have an American tower, an American business center, and in the same highway, the Chinese built their own Chinese tower, a Chinese business. But you don't see a major Turkish presence. But if you go to these places like Turkestan, southern desert of Kazakhstan, then you see the Turks. If you go to parts of Kyrgyzstan, parts of Bishkek, the capital, you see Turkish companies in Bishkek, for instance. So they're trying little by little to offer some competition to Russian and Chinese interests. But the local elites in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan especially, two major Central Asian powers, they know exactly what's going on, so they are profiting from all sides. And very interesting point, they are already BRICS members as partners. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are already BRICS partners. Turkey is not even a BRICS partner. They haven't answered the official invitation yet.
Could that partly explain why Erdogan has been flirting with BRICS? It's less sort of a goodwill gesture towards Russia and China and more about trying to strengthen its stature among the Central Asian countries that are gravitating towards BRICS.
Excellent. That's exactly it, Dimitri. That's it. But he doesn't have much time, because this year, BRICS as a whole are going to ask the Turks directly, are you in or out? We made an invitation at the Kazan Forum to be a partner. We haven't received a response. The other ones respond, and they are already BRICS partners. You haven't responded yet. So you can juggle, you can hedge your bets, but for a limited period of time.
So, I mean, I guess this raises, again, a more broader question, because as you've explained it, the core of Turkish foreign policy is trying to integrate itself with the West, while at the same time doing some sort of transactional deals with Russia, with China, partially in order to kind of scare people in the West into making concessions. It's worked so far. Will it continue to work for the foreseeable future, or is there a reason to believe this whole train could go off the rails?
Could go off the rails because of how significant BRICS are going to become from now on, after they have a extremely significant meeting in Kazan, which was, let's say, the departure of the high-speed BRICS train. It's already on. It's picking up speed little by little. This year is going to be complicated because the Brazilians are the presidents, and the Brazilians, there is a lobby against BRICS inside the Brazilian government. So it's going to be a very complicated year. But the Russians and the Chinese will keep pushing. And now that Trump has officially declared his own words, war against the BRICS, for the absolute wrong reasons, because he is badly misinformed. The BRICS don't want a BRICS currency. And Peskov, Kremlin spokesman, was forced to go on the record and say, this is not what we're doing. We're working on alternative payment settlements.
Yes.
It's a completely different story.
I just do want to say,
yes.
Imagine I just think it speaks volumes about the fact that a non-existent BRICS currency has Donald Trump absolutely spooked.
Spooked.
He is terrified.
Yes.
Yeah. And, again, I don't want to go too far away from Turkey, but I really have this, this has been boiling over, so I want to get it out. The Americans have become such crybabies. China makes an AI breakthrough. Oh, you stole it.
You stole it. Yeah.
Russia makes a hypersonic missile.
You stole the design.
You stole it from us. Major tech companies prefer to hire Indians because Indians work harder and are smarter and, do a cheaper price. You guys are invading our countries and you don't know how to use the toilet. I mean, guys, stop bitching and whining all the time. This is just getting embarrassing. You are supposed to be the world's premier superpower, and you sound like a 16-year-old girl that has feuds with all the other girls at school. Guys, get it together. You don't have a functional country anymore. Take a deep breath, solve your own problems, and just stop with this petty bullshit. But I'm sorry,
I love that you put it this way, Dimitri, and that's exactly it. It's like, I remember when I was in high school, it's the kind of bitching that you find in high school corridors, and it's exactly the same. Why? Because they don't have a long-term strategy. They have tactics, and these tactics are for this week, for next week, for the next quarter maximum. They don't have a long-term vision. They never saw it coming. BRICS and the way BRICS are articulating themselves. They don't even understand the concept of BRICS. If you ask think tanks in the Beltway, very few published papers or analysis or deep analysis on BRICS. Very, very few, if any, right? So they don't know. And the people around Trump, obviously, they are so misinformed that they cannot tell the president of the United States what BRICS are up to. So he already launched a de facto war. Many of us were saying that even before the inauguration. 2025, he's going to go against the BRICS. We didn't know that it would be like this, and for the completely wrong reasons on top of it.
Yes. But I do want to get back to Turkey, right?
Yeah, of course.
We had our sort of 2 minutes of rage against Trump.
No, but everything is interlocked.
So, Trump doesn't get BRICS. As I understand, the Turks also don't get BRICS.
No, because they, for the ruling classes behind the AKP, for the AKP party and for Erdogan himself, they want to extract something out of BRICS. And this is not how BRICS works. BRICS gives the floor to everybody to act as equals on the same table. And the decisions are consensual, always. It's not win-lose deals. So the Turks still don't get it. So that's why it's going to be very hard for them to be accommodated inside BRICS. And for instance, the Iranians understand it, the Central Asians who are now partners understand it, the Southeast Asians, which are now a mega power inside BRICS, including Indonesia as a full member, totally understand it because they're dealing with China. And when you deal with China, you deal on a win-win basis, right? It's the fundamentals, the geoeconomic fundamentals of China, we make deals with everybody on a win-win basis. And with, I would say with Trump 2.0 is a win-lose going cosmic. Everything that he's been saying in terms of tariffs, trade wars ahead, Canada, Mexico, Greenland, Panama Canal, everything is a win-lose deal. America has to win. And this war already launched against the BRICS is the epitome of win-lose. You want to try to do something, escape from the dollar, we're going after you. It's a win-lose. Even the possibility of a diplomatic encounter or discussion, no, it's threats. So, everything can change from one day to another in Washington, as we all know, but things remain the same in the end.
Well, Pepe, I know that a conversation on Turkey could have taken hours, but I think we did pretty well in much less than that.
In much less than an hour, yes.
Yeah.
It's a start.
Yeah, it's a start. But I think that, we'll be coming back to this topic not only in 2025, but also beyond. And to all our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video, please make sure to like it,